5, 6, 7, 8.
Hi EXers, welcome to the EX Podcast episode number 47. This is your host, Stefan Vincent. I'm here today with you because we need to shake things up in the world of HR, talent acquisition, recruiting, company culture, in order to create positive employee experiences in our organizations. Your workplace doesn't have to be a dreadful place where employees feel disengaged. This podcast brings a different lens to the HR, employee engagement, and company culture conversation. We approach these topics from a brand and customer experience angle rather than a traditional HR angle. Our guests, all thought leaders and disruptors in the EX space in their own way, come to this show to share best practices on the key elements that foster employee engagement and strengthen company culture, and also to spark the conversation on how to create those positive employee experiences. Not every company can do what Airbnb or Google do around their employee experience. And this is what this show is all about. Sharing stories of companies of all sizes, not only to show that EX doesn't require a large budget or a large team, but also that there isn't one recipe. Each company can find its own way through the EX journey. Today's guest is Rachel Friedman, calling from Columbus, Ohio. Rachel is the founder and CEO of TENFOLD, an award-winning strategy and creative firm that reveals and reflects the magic of brands and culture. Today with Rachel, we will talk about what are the general key components for an engaging workspace, how specifically workplace design, culture, and brand stories can be used to boost employee engagement. What is the process Rachel applies to client projects to understand the culture, translate it into stories, and design elements to bring those stories to life? And finally, what future trends she sees in workspace design. This episode is brought to you by Fusion Alliance. Fusion Alliance delivers holistic solutions fusing together data, digital, and technology to redefine customer experiences and move your ideas to execution. That's why businesses across multiple industries have relied on Fusion's expertise and partnership for over 25 years. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Rachel. And if you get a chance, please make sure to review the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, or YouTube. And last thing, if you want to send me feedback, suggestions for future topics or guests, you can reach me at svincent@exsummit.com or on Twitter @EX_summit. All right, let's get to it. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the EX Podcast. Super excited for today's guest, Rachel Friedman. Rachel is calling from Columbus, Ohio, and she is the founder and CEO of TENFOLD, an award-winning strategy and creative firm that reveals and reflects the magic of brands and culture. Rachel, thanks for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me.
So the first easy question of the show for you is, can you tell us a bit more about who you are and what TENFOLD does exactly?
Sure. So I'm Rachel Friedman, as you said, and I've basically spent my entire career really working with corporations and businesses and organizations, primarily to help them align their workplace with their business. So I started my career many years ago as an interior designer. So I have a fine arts degree in design. And through the course of my career, really found that I had a passion for business, almost more than my passion for design. So as I started to work with clients and learn more about what they were doing, I found that I could be a better designer for their workplace if I understood their business model. So after several years of working in my industry, I went back to school and earned my MBA in marketing and strategy. And what I found over the years was that, we were able to create spaces for clients that were aesthetically beautiful and they were functionally appropriate, but they didn't tell their story. And I found that there was an opportunity to really help clients leverage their space as a medium to communicate, to really help them, as we kind of say in our mission, to reveal and reflect the magic of brand and culture. So about 3/4 through my career, nearly 22 years into it, I founded TENFOLD. And that's really what we do at TENFOLD. We help clients leverage space and their investment in space by using things like the walls or the floors or the ceilings to help them tell a very inspired brand and culture story, really connecting people to place in a meaningful way.
When I think of office space, I think of the antithesis of good design, meaning for me that's the movie Office Space.
Right.
In ugly cubicles, closed offices, a culture that makes you want to jump off a bridge. So from your projects and your experience, could you tell us at a high level what would be the general key elements for engaging workspace, and how should companies embrace that space to really tell their story and allow the employees to experience what the brand is all about?
Yeah, I think, overall, as human beings, we all want to have a sense of purpose and to feel inspired at work. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of different ways, obviously, that plays into the employee experience. Your job responsibilities, how you interact with management, and more of the tactical sides of things. But I think that there's also this opportunity with the environment to support and cultivate and nurture a positive employee experience. So people want to be healthy at work. They want to be comfortable at work. They want to have choice and flexibility in how they work. And from a management perspective, companies have a lot of goals and objectives around innovation, around productivity, around efficiency. And so all of those things really need to come together to allow people to do their best work. And so the way that we look at the environment is that it's an opportunity. It's a channel, if you will, to connect with the people that work there. It isn't the only channel, but it is a channel, and it's oftentimes one that is overlooked or neglected. So what we're able to do is come in and work with clients to understand not only what their brand story is, but what their culture narrative is. So when people say, well, what's it like to work here? If you're interviewing, for example, or tell me about the culture here, or tell me about what the people are like here. What we're able to do is work with clients to really help pull out what's special and unique about their culture and make those connections so that they become a little bit more tangible in the workplace. What we call what we call that discipline really is environmental branding, which can kind of be a confusing term because it has nothing to do with being sustainable or green. It's really about leveraging the environment to help promote those feelings of being inspired or educated or informed.
So let's talk a bit more about it, because I would argue that it's easier to define what the customer brand is, and I would say most companies have pretty well defined what the brand means to their customers and what the brand proposition is to their customers. Mm-hmm. However, when you ask those same companies to define what the culture is about, it's much more challenging for them to articulate what the culture is. So what is the sort of exercise that you go with your clients to really get out of them what the culture is? And the second aspect of the question is, how can you translate it into a brand story in the workspace?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and it was actually the inspiration for our culture practice at TENFOLD. So we would have that experience where we would meet with leaders of organizations, and we would be there to help determine how we were going to brand the space. And we would hear things from them like, our culture, it's our secret sauce. And I would get really excited about that and say, well, that's amazing. Tell me more about that. And then that's when the conversation would stop, because it is so hard to define and articulate. What we found is that people know if it's good or healthy, or they have a sense whether it's unhealthy or dysfunctional, but in either case have a really difficult time putting their finger on it. So at Tenfold, we thought, well, this is an opportunity to try to, we want to solve this. And what we do is we actually use a technique, a research methodology that we've adapted from some work that had been done on the brand side to say that, the consumer of the culture is the associate. So we have leveraged a technique that's rooted in a discipline of psychology called narratology, where we actually use prompts with story and dreams and pictures to enable people to kind of drop their rational filters and answer very rational questions, to really open up on the inside and tell us kind of more about what they're feeling, so we can understand truly what the culture is about and why. And the process is fascinating. We're able to uncover so many insights that not only relate to that secret sauce that people can't put their finger on, but also opportunities for improvement, because all organizations have those opportunities for improvement. So what we found is that there's kind of three buckets, if you will, that clients fall into. One is the kind of the fast growing, we love our culture and we're afraid we're going to lose it. And so how do we define it and articulate it so that we can protect it and reinforce it? We have clients who kind of in that second category, where we would call them the transformational client, where they know they have a culture today, but they have an aspiration to transform and kind of move to a different level. And that could be going from good to great, or it could be, a company that has some challenges or problems. And we help them figure out where they are in terms of a baseline. We help them define and articulate that aspirational culture, and then we help them build a strategy and a plan to get there. And then that third category is really kind of the merger acquisition client. So those clients who are looking to acquire or merge with another organization, how do they determine, is there a good cultural fit? And if so, how do they plan to move forward together? And so in all of those cases, there's a lot of recommendations that come out of that research and those insights. And one of them, is our place practice, which is how do we help bring that to life in the environment through leveraging words and phrases or images, or essentially in some ways custom art, to really help people understand and connect to what that story is. And it's a constant reminder. So if you think about kind of that either 7 times or 11 times, whatever rule of marketing you have, that people have to hear something that many times to start to really understand it or remember it, the environment is a constant. Your associates are going to walk past walls and experience that environment every day, multiple times a day. And so how do you use the space to help bring people along on that journey, that culture journey with you?
So this brand story and those, let's say, culture brand attributes are generated from conversations with the employees, right, as well as with the leadership team, but the
Correct.
Employees are really at the center of this initiative, correct?
For our research, we include, it's essentially done through one-on-one interviews. So it's a qualitative research. We don't have to interview every associate in the organization.
Right. Yeah,
we do hit all executives typically, and then we do a subset of the employee population. And what we find through the research is that after a certain number, depending on the size of the organization, that number changes. But after a certain number of interviews, we start to see consistent melody lines that tell us, that confirm or validate that, this is a common theme, this is a common insight, this is a common message that we're picking up.
Do you usually see more of alignments or a disconnect between talking to the executives of what they think about the culture and what the employees think about the culture? There's a surprising amount of alignment, which is good.
It
is. It should be.
Yes, it should be, and so, that's a very positive sign. I think it's interesting. I think that especially as it relates to opportunities or challenges, that a lot of times at the executive level, they are aware that there is, again, everyone can kind of feel it. It's an energy. It's an intangible that, perhaps there's something that's kind of not working as well as they'd like it to. And then once we're able, and they have a much harder time to really identify that. But when it is identified through engagement with the associates, the most common reaction we get when we report out our findings is relief, which was not an adjective that we, would have expected, to feel relieved. But that's what we hear the most and it's because, wow, I knew this was there, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I didn't know how to describe it. And that makes a lot of sense to me. And sometimes just acknowledging what those stressors or pressure points are in the organization and really being able to name it to the point where this is what it is and this is why. And by the way, here's ways that we can help to change that. Even just the discussion of it and the awareness of it, it just lifts the organization. It has a dramatic impact.
So according to a 2017 survey by Deloitte, 87% of organizations cite culture and engagements as one of their top priorities, or challenges, but almost 2/3 of executives do not feel that they are effectively driving this desired culture within the organization. So obviously, as you said, there's a buy-in from the executive and there's a buy-in from the employees. How specifically workplace design and culture branding can be used to boost employee engagement beyond just getting employees involved into the discovery process?
Well, one of the frameworks that we look at as it relates to corporate culture is a Harvard Business Review framework that has 6 components to it, which are vision, values, people, so your hiring practices, and rituals. And then the other 2, number 5 and number 6, are narrative and place. And so it's interesting for us. I think we see companies do a pretty good job with those first 4. They've established their vision, they've defined their values, although we think there could be a lot of improvement in the values space, defining values to make them more unique and differentiated.
Right. It's always a challenge.
It is. I mean, there's a lot of people view values as table stakes. Associates do. It's like, honesty, integrity, teamwork. People hope that those values exist. So what we really encourage clients to do with the values piece is to try to make them much more unique and differentiated and much more specific to who they are. We feel kind of our perspective on those is that they're foundational, they're important, and if you compare them to kind of the footers or the foundation of a home, it's kind of a standard spec. My footers aren't going to look that much different than yours or the house 3 blocks over, but it doesn't describe what the house looks like, how it feels, what the texture of it is, what the style of it is. And so as a result, it really isn't very differentiated. And because it isn't very differentiated, it isn't very memorable. And so that's why, we think people have a tough time remembering their values and why companies have to publish them on the backs of business cards and things of that nature. We really try to encourage clients to find what really inspires their people. We at Tenfold have a value that is related to entrepreneurship. So that's entrepreneurial spirit. And we refer to it as putting your fingerprint on the journey. And so putting your fingerprint on the journey really conjures up a picture in your mind and in some inspiring language that people can really grab onto and remember and visualize for themselves. So that's just an example of how you can be a little bit more creative with the values. And then, there's a company here locally in Columbus that we haven't worked with, but Crosschecks, they're located a few blocks away from us, and their founder, Brad Masco, who I met with about a year ago, was talking about some of their values. One of their values is put the skunk on the table, which I just thought was hilarious. And so instead of saying we have a value of transparency, they're able to say, use a phrase, again, that sticks with them. It becomes part of their language, their day-to-day language, and it really takes hold. And that's where you can really start to have some traction with your organization and really move that forward. And then as it relates to the environmental branding side of that, you can take things like put your fingerprint on the journey, and you can bring that phrase to life in the environment, either through the actual explicit words that you might create as a design in the space, or perhaps there's a visual that's created that sends that message or conjures that theme, again, that reminds people but also inspires them. And so those are some ways that you can take some of those learnings and some of those insights and start to leverage space to connect with your associates and communicate with them. We use a lot of digital technology. So these aren't things that necessarily you design and install and they stay there forever. There are some of those, and we think a good installation has a nice balance of pieces that are timeless, that you will, they're like art and you'll just love them forever. But then there's also the need to make sure that message stays evergreen and fresh. So, one of the things that we read about as far as engagement scores and things of that nature are associates understanding where the company's going and really buying into the vision. And that's, again, a way where it's amazing how associates will say they don't understand what the vision is, or they don't know what the vision is. Finding ways to communicate that in the environment so that it's right there for them to be reminded of is really important. And those things can change. So if you leverage digital displays, things like goals or vision or performance or any of those types of messages from an executive management team, those types of things can be conveyed and communicated. And if they're done in a creative way, and if they're done in an inspiring way, associates will pay attention.
So maybe let's go through those buckets and try to identify what is the natural and logical pathway to go from the vision to the values, and then maybe we can talk about the two last components that are usually overlooked by organizations. So you had vision and values. What is the third one?
People. So your hiring practices, the people in the organization, obviously, right, job fit and that sort of thing. Rituals are sometimes things that are prescribed, but that was the fourth one. And sometimes just, those are the things that just happen in your organization. The 5 and 6 was narrative and place. So narrative is really understanding what your story is, and again, kind of defining and articulating it and having it live in a lot of different ways. And then place is, all those decisions that you make about the workplace and your environment.
So obviously, I would imagine that in many cases, when you come on board to work on telling the story of the brands in the workspace, the office has already been designed. So what is the mental exercise to play with the existing office space and to make it more telling around the story and what the culture is about?
Yeah, so what we do is we look at the space through a few different lenses. One is the circulation. So how do different target audiences move through the environment? They all have their own path, and sometimes there's a lot of overlap on that path, but sometimes it can be very different. And so what we do is we actually physically sort of map that within the floor plate to understand if I'm moving through the environment and I'm, let's say, as a target audience, I'm a prospective employee that's there. They're going to be recruiting me. What is my experience like? How does that story unfold as I come from possibly, even as far as the parking garage into the building and into the interview room, and so forth. And then based on the different target audiences, we're able to align the themes and messaging that we've culled and that we've uncovered to figure out how we want that story to unfold for various visitors and employees in the organization. Then the other lens that we look at in terms of the space is the architectural lens. So not all spaces lend themselves really well to environmental branding. There are certain types of aspects that help. What we love to see is scale. So walls that, 2-story spaces, large atrium spaces, spaces that don't have a lot of obstructed view, where you can kind of view them from kind of get these long sweeping perspectives. Those are all great spaces to brand. Spaces that are common areas that are experienced by a lot of different people, obviously, are really good spaces to brand. And that's just, where you have your highest traffic areas. And then, of course, that's kind of your greatest return on investment. So those are kind of two of the things that we really look at to evaluate where within the space, and then how we create the strategy around what's the content or the message that we need to place in that area.
You talked about targeted audiences. How do you identify what the different audiences are? Is it something that you work along with the leadership team? Is it something that you try to define, getting feedback from the employees directly? What's the process there?
Yeah, so we do a number of different things, and we kind of put all of that into our discover phase of the process. So it can include us going, almost like secret shoppers, if you will, to experience the space and walk it. So that's one thing we do. We also facilitate a vision session, which includes representation from our client, and it could be, depending again on the size of the company and the kind of desires that the company has. Sometimes we can have very large groups. We like to really encourage a mix of executive leadership as well as all different levels of the organization, different tenures, different job types, and titles. And we facilitate a brainstorming session with them around some key discussion points. One is the goals and the objectives. So why is it that we're investing time and resources in branding the environment? Why is that important? Then we do spend time talking about the target audiences. So who are all the different target audiences that they're trying to connect with? And it's very interesting because from company to company, those lists really do change in terms of their prioritization. And it's really fascinating. And so we'll go through some prioritization exercises on both of those questions, as well as kind of the meatiest part of our meeting, which is really about content and theming. So we'll spend a lot of time, in addition to all the independent research and discovery work that we do at our studio, we will facilitate a lot of discussion with this vision session group around, okay, if this is the story, what are the chapters of the story? And not just this is who we are, but this is who we are that makes us really special and unique and differentiated, because we want to tell the differentiated story, not the thing that everyone knows and is and expects. And then we go through some prioritization exercises around that as well. So that really helps us frame up some of the strategy. We describe it as establishing the banks of the river. We don't leave with a prescriptive solution from that session, but it allows us to establish the banks of the river so that we know where we can kind of jump in and start to narrow the universe of possibilities down to some strategies, some direction, and some initial concepts for the branding.
So I'm curious about the discovery phase as well, and the process that goes along with that. Now, oftentimes I hear companies, when you ask them to define the culture, we work hard and we play hard, right? Which doesn't mean anything at all to me. And everybody says that. So how do you go from that we play hard, we work hard statements to a deeper and more meaningful statement about what the culture is really about and what are the differentiators?
Yeah, so as I kind of mentioned before, we use some research instruments and prompts, and a lot of them really relate to storytelling, and then we're trained to interpret what those stories mean. But an example could be, your culture was a superhero. Tell me about its superpowers and who are its three friends and who are its three foes. And, something as simple as that question. And a lot of this is just contemporaneous. It's in the moment. And that's what we want. We kind of want that gut reaction and response. And we can also do this through homework as well. But we get some really rich insights to that special, secret sauce. And, and then we can even frame our research instruments to get at or go deeper with some of the things around work hard and play hard. We use a lot of imagery. So we'll provide a prompt and have people bring in images that they feel represent what we've asked them to go out and search for. And again, it's uncanny as to how much consistency we'll see across an organization. And then we take all of those research findings, and we're able to interpret them.
So you talked about having digital assets versus like wall-mounted or printed assets. Mm-hmm. How often would you suggest that the narrative has to change? Not necessarily the essence and the DNA mm-hmm. of the narrative, but more about the stories that are being told.
Yeah, so one of the things that we do in the strategy is we have specific conversations about life cycle of the content. Mm-hmm. And so we're able to kind of categorize those. It's not a hard, fast rule, but we'll have some that are the life of the lease, if you will, because that drives a lot of the investment. If a company is going to lease a space for 10 years, then that's really kind of the time frame that we're looking at for the more quote unquote permanent pieces. Are they going to be relevant for 7 to 10 years, which is a kind of a standard lease time? So we have those solutions. We have some that kind of fall in the shorter term. So things that, might need to be updated once a year or once every couple years, the shorter term life cycle. And then we have promotional content, which is stuff that you might want to update once a week, once a month, every other month. I would say those all fall into what we would consider to be that kind of promotional category, things that we would want to have a really organized editorial calendar for and some support around. There is nothing worse than clients who invest in digital display technology and never change the content.
No kidding.
And it happens all the time. And it's just it's a commitment. And if you're going to do it, a lot of companies just want to have digital because they think they need to look cool. But there's nothing, worse for their brand and their culture than when they put a loop up that, runs 365 days a year. It's almost an insult to their employees when they do that. So it's something that they need to be really committed around.
So who should own that piece within mm-hmm. the organization? Is it HR? Is it marketing? Is it facilities?
Yeah, so it changes depending on the organization that mm-hmm. we're working with. And they oftentimes, work with us, which is great. And that's a service that we can provide to these companies to help keep them current. But it lives sometimes within marketing and communications. So if they have a strong internal communications group, and we love when they're kind of the same, right? Because that means that the communication is the right content, but it's going to look great and sound great when marketing is involved too, and beyond brand. And then corporate real estate tends to own the assets and the space, and mm-hmm. so there needs to be some really solid coordination between the two and a really good working relationship. We don't often see HR own that piece, but we really like to have them involved. And I think that those are the three organizational groups within the firm that are critical for the work being as successful as it can be.
So one thing that is being popular now in the retail space are those pop-up shops, right? There's temporary mm-hmm. shops that are going to be in an empty space or on the sidewalk or just at a venue for a specific period of time. Do you see this a little bit into the office space as well?
It's a really interesting question. Lately, I've seen a desire for companies to want to have that. They want to create an experience to roll out a strategy. And I think that there's some relevance to that, especially if it's a confidential something they're going to be sharing a lot of confidential information that they can really contain and control that environment. But I would encourage, my bias would be to encourage how that can be an ongoing part of the day-to-day experience of the workplace as opposed to a temporary sort of pop-up experience. Because I think that through smart design that we create for the workplace, you can feel like you have that lever to pull whenever you want. You can create a new and a different experience within the workplace, within the work environment. So interactive brand immersion type spaces that we create for clients that are a part of the work, the day-to-day work environment.
So what are some of the future trends that you see in office space design and culture brand storytelling? Is it something that is going to drastically change in the next few years? Is it going to be more of a massive adoption of this type of thinking? How do you see companies in the next 10, 15 years looking at the office space design and their culture brand story?
I think initially, at least for now, it's a lot of adoption. So I still, to this day, meet with clients that don't really know what I'm even talking about. And that's it's good for us. It's a good opportunity. And I've spent, at least 10 years of my career having these initial conversations with clients, and they get it really quickly and they want it, which is terrific. But most of them still today haven't set aside a line item in their budget for it. It's not something that they've been thinking about. They don't necessarily have those three groups in their organization talking to each other about this. And so I think there's a lot of work just to be done in the kind of adoption space. One trend that I have seen with companies that have been doing this for a while is they actually may have full-time associates internal that they have put in a position to be in charge of their environmental branding. So I've seen just a little bit of that in the work in our market, which is interesting. So I don't think that's something that people thought would be a career that they could pursue internally within an organization. So I found that to be kind of interesting. I think that virtual reality technology, those types of things, we're still trying to figure out, does that have a place? And if it does, what does it look like? There's a lot of really cool stuff that can be done with technology, but in some cases you need to really control the light level in the environment to make those really successful. And of course, that can be a challenge in the workplace. So I think that's kind of the next frontier, is to really kind of see where some of that virtual reality technology takes us, and maybe some artificial intelligence technology on the culture side. Is there a way to establish some technologies that can tell us what are kind of the vital signs of our culture and our organization? How are we doing? Because the work that we do is the one thing we say to clients is we come in and we do our research, and it's incredibly insightful and fascinating, and we're able to put together the plan. But it's not something that companies can just engage in on a one time. They need to make a commitment to continue to nurture and manage their culture. It's a focus. We definitely have seen, and I'm sure you've seen in terms of trend as well, we're seeing titles change. So we're seeing chief culture officers and vice presidents of culture. So I think that's quite interesting as well. And is it just in the name? Has the function really changed?
Exactly. Yeah, that was
right.
That's what I was about to say. Yeah, if it's just a name change from HR to culture,
yes,
but the meaning behind it doesn't mean anything, then it's just a sort of band-aid to it.
Yeah, and I think that we can help be a part of that change and help to really define what does that mean to be a chief culture officer. What are the things that you focus on? What are your strategic initiatives? And then how do you implement those? And how are they different than the traditional HR career and profession, and the things that still are very important and still need to get done in the HR space?
Now, with all the connected devices that we carry around, whether it's a smartphone, it's a smartwatch, a tablet, or whatever it might be, and more and more, at least large companies embracing sensor technology to not necessarily to track where the employees are going and the employees' whereabouts, but more to have a sense of the circulation, as you said, in the workplace. Do you see that this combined to using digital assets, that more and more companies will be able, and you as well, will be able to provide different contents based on different employee groups? Let's say if you pass by the lobby and you have a large plasma screen, depending on your demographic, you may see a different message based on your identification identity.
Right. So there's today, ways that we can use RFID technology to, just like they are starting to use in retail environments to promote certain messaging. And I think there can be some really interesting experiences with that, and it can be very valuable, and it can really land and really connect with people. I think there's always that fine line that you walk, right, with associates feeling that it's very big brother and that they're not comfortable with it. So I think we still haven't quite figured out how people think or feel about that. I think that the younger generation entering the workforce is probably going to be a little more comfortable with it because they understand the value and the benefits of the technology, recognizing who they are to be able to personalize that experience. But I do think there's some interesting things that can be accomplished in that space, but I do think it's a fine line to walk, especially with associates. There have been some technologies I know that have been implemented to try to better study and understand how people are using space. So where there's vacancies, and are there really, full use of conference spaces? And that's so valuable. It's such valuable information to have from a planning perspective. But I know that, kind of the butts and chairs feeling of, am I in my office? Am I not in my office? Has made some organizations uncomfortable in implementing that kind of technology. But again, to me, that goes back to culture. Whereas if you've established a culture where it's people understand and fully honestly accept that it's perfectly fine for you to be moving around your environment and choosing where you want to work during the day, whether it's at your desk because you have some heads down focus time, or you want to go sit in the more open collaborative cafe space and you're going to camp there for 5 hours, that's okay. And I think that, companies that truly have that sort of culture wouldn't be concerned if someone put a sensor on their chair. But in cultures where that's just really not the norm, then putting a sensor on your chair is going to feel very uncomfortable.
So a few minutes ago, we were talking about whether or not, when you talk to business owners, they have a dedicated line budget for office space and brand storytelling. Does it have to be expensive to go through that, or are there some incremental steps that if you don't want to go the full Monty right away, you can actually do a few things leading to the bigger projects eventually?
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of ways that we kind of address that with clients. I think that, first of all, it's all relative, right? So if you compare it to, as far as a budget's concerned, what clients have allocated for furniture or what they've allocated for interiors, it can be, a fraction of those things. We've had clients tell us who hadn't budgeted for it and then discovered that they really wanted it and needed it, figured out a way to afford it, have come back and said this was the best ROI on the project, which is fantastic. We love to hear that. And it sounds self-serving, but our experience is that when people have gone through that process, and whether it's a renovation or it's a new space for them, and they move into the space, the things that they are most proud of tend to be the environmental branding in the space. The things that their associates are taking pictures of and blasting out to social media to share with their family and friends in the world are those moments that we've created throughout the environment that remind them who they are, that give them a sense of purpose and identity, things that they're very proud of with their organization. So there's a great ROI on it. And as far as economical ways, I do think that it reminds me of a project that we worked on once where it was, from an architectural perspective, the building itself was like cinder block walls. I mean, there was nothing special about the architecture. And so even just to, leverage cut vinyl graphics on paint, which is probably one of the least expensive things, or printing to a fiber board or a gator board and cleating it to the wall can just dramatically change the experience of that space. And the one thing that I would say to clients as well, and I talked about scale a little bit earlier, one of the biggest mistakes that I see clients make with their space if they are doing things themselves is getting the scale wrong. So take advantage of the full wall. Make sure that what you're doing is proportional and it fits. It's not a little framed poster that you're hanging in the center of the wall, which is what we see most of the time. So really take advantage of the space, and that's awe-inspiring. As a human being, when you sense something that has some scale, and so you can really make an impact with scale.
Do you have a story that you could share about a specific project or a project that was very meaningful to you? So that our listeners have a very practical and tangible idea of what a project like this could look like?
Yeah, so we were fortunate to do some work out in Bristol, Connecticut with ESPN. At TENFOLD, we've done probably a dozen projects out there. And one of the spaces that we created was to celebrate their in front of the camera talent, which is done in a lot of media companies in a very traditional way, where you take kind of an 8x10 glossy and it's them sitting behind the desk or whatever the setting is, and they're framed up on the wall. What we decided to do was, as it related to ESPN, was to capture the top 100 catchphrases that have become part of popular culture that have been said on their air. They actually own these phrases, but they weren't celebrating them anywhere, and they hadn't really captured them or put them all in one place. So if you're a fan of the brand, things like Diaper Dandy, which is Dick Vitale, or Back, Chris Berman, and all of these different things that it's a big part of the brand personality. It's playful, it's memorable, and the most popular catchphrase is "Booyah," which was Stuart Scott's catchphrase. And so, as far as kind of a meaningful story, we had created this beautiful typography catchphrase wall that, again, has huge scale. So it's really impressive, and it's the top 100. And we had a lot of fun working with them to kind of whittle it down from a list of 500 to 100. And about 4 months after the wall was installed, or not 4 months, it was probably about 8 months after the wall was installed, Stuart Scott passed away. And what we found in his passing was that people really connected with that wall as a way to connect to his memory. And it wasn't intended to be that, but it became almost a tribute wall where people were leaving flowers by the wall. And we were kind of overwhelmed by that whole experience. And it validated that what we strive for is this emotional connection between people and place. And that particular example really shine the light on that type of connection that people were having with the wall. So, and even the day that he had passed, they had introduced to the world on their website that he had died by referencing this wall that steps outside of the SportsCenter studio. So I was just blown away by that. And we said, you know what, our work matters. It means something to people, and we knew that. But this just kind of further reinforced that for us.
Right. Yeah, that's a great story. So before we end our conversation today, let me ask you some fun questions. If you were to invite someone famous to dinner, who would you pick and why?
I have really troubles with these questions. I don't know why, but that one, I couldn't settle on a famous figure. But what I decided is that I would love to have my great grandmother and my grandmother join me for dinner, who are, both passed away. And I knew my grandmother pretty well, but as a woman now, I'll be 48 this week. There's so many other things that I would want to ask her that I never got a chance to ask her. And with my great grandmother, the same sort of thing. I mean, I knew her as a little girl, but they both were very strong, independent women, not necessarily because they chose to be, but because of their life circumstances. And my grandmother ran a jelly factory after her husband, who had run the factory for years, had passed away. And this was at a time where women didn't do things like that and didn't own businesses. And she had some stories of kind of stirring these large vats of jelly in downtown Cleveland with a boat oar. And so as a woman who owns a business today, and just some of the things that I've been through, I would just love to ask them so many questions that I never got to ask. So
it's a very indeed answer, I would say, and happy birthday, by the way.
Oh, well, thank you.
So, who is the designer that inspires you the most? It can be a fashion designer, it can be interior designer, architect. What is the most inspiring designer for you?
Well, for a big chunk of my career, I worked for Herman Miller. And if you're familiar with the furniture industry, innovator and manufacturer, they are known for their history of partnering with furniture designers and designers of all different kinds, graphic designers and interior designers, in a really unique collaborative process to create some amazing pieces of work. And so Charles and Ray Eames would probably be the designers that I'm inspired by the most. I just inspired by them in a lot of levels. I think they're unique. Their marriage and partnership in design was really special and really celebrated. And then, of course, the innovations that they made and how the use of materials and just the simplicity of the forms that they created, and the fact that any good design like theirs stands the test of time. And so those would be the ones that probably inspire me the most.
What could we spot you doing outside of work that would flabbergast your coworkers?
I play ice hockey.
Oh.
Well, I don't get to play nearly as much as I would like to, or I have in the past, but I picked it up about 3 years ago. When I was in high school, I played field hockey, and I enjoyed skating, but I never thought of putting the two together. And I had gone to some games and thought, I think I can do that. And I think I actually would really enjoy that. And so a few years ago, I full pads, the whole thing, joined a women's league, and have very fond memories of my very first goal, which was I saw it was open. I had a shot. I reached as far as I could, completely fell on the ice on my back, and watched the puck roll right into the goal. And it was a victorious moment for me.
That's awesome.
Yes,
it's
ice
a
hockey.
Very physical sport too.
It is. Women, they don't really it's not nearly as physical, but it's fun. It's fun to go fast on the ice and know that if you fall, you're not going to hurt yourself. And it's great exercise. And so, yeah, I really enjoyed it.
What is your favorite food?
I love Italian food. And if you're local to Columbus, I love Giuseppe's Italian food. So kind of Northern Italian, actually planning a trip to Italy this summer. So I'm looking forward to all of those experiences and having some authentic Northern Italian.
What is the way for listeners to follow you and Tenfold on social media?
So we post pretty regularly to Instagram, and we'd love for you to come visit our site at tenfoldbrand.com. And we're out there on LinkedIn and Facebook, and we have a tremendous amount of imagery of our portfolio of work, which I think I often say to clients, and I'm sure some of the listeners are probably feeling this way, that a picture is worth 1,000 words. Mm-hmm. So oftentimes what we're referencing, what we're talking about with our work is so visual, but we'd love to welcome you to come and see our full portfolio at tenfoldbrand.com.
All right, and then we'll share all of those on the podcast notes as well. Any last word of advice or wisdom?
I would just say to really focus in on your people and your culture, and really take steps to better understand on an ongoing basis kind of what's going on in your organization. It is a source of competitive advantage, there is no doubt, especially when you can find that overlap between your brand and culture. And what we mean by that is the things about your culture that your clients or your consumers value so much that they're willing to pay for it. It's part of their brand experience. And what is it about your brand that your employees really want to work for so that they can truly and authentically live the brand? That's the sweet spot. That's what we really try to help our clients uncover and really exploit. And again, that's really where some sustainable competitive advantage can be found.
Well, thank you so much, Rachel, for taking the time to speak with me today. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate being on.
Thanks for tuning in to the EX Podcast. If you want to learn more, visit our website at expodcast.com. If you want to find out more about our next conferences, go to exsummit.com. Finally, you can also find my manifesto on business to employee or B2E branding at b2ebranding.co. See you next week.